How's it going, guys? In this video, we're going to talk about psychic abilities and opening your third eye and all of the kind of related phenomena, stuff that I've experienced so many times throughout the course of my life that I would have to say that I'm psychic, I guess. I don't like the sound of that. I'm almost appalled to hear the words come out of my mouth. But at the same time, this stuff has happened so many times that there's just no question of coincidence for me at this point. I mean, really, there shouldn't have been much earlier in the process. But, you really have to remain committed to intelligent thinking and objectivity and in the interest of preserving the integrity of my intellect, and sanity, you have to admit that there is an extremely high probability of coincidence for any, sheer coincidence, and nothing more. Just because we are confronted with such an incredible spectrum of information and potentials, potential vectors of possibility and actuality concurring, right? So it's really difficult to really ascertain, for certain anything at all in this world. And then, we have a very almost ubiquitous tendency, I think, amongst, so many people to, it's having an ability to believe things that are obviously patently false, that there's no possibility that they're true. And, people will just really willfully invest in things that they want to believe. And I have always been on a quest for truth. And so I'm very cautious about this stuff. And I guess partly that is a testament to the fact that I have really come through these experiences unable to reject them. The most recent one was with a client today, or at least I became aware of it today. He was telling me that, I'd been working with him with ayahuasca here for about a month. In Ecuador, and he had continued to drink on his own now back in Australia, and I suggested to him that I felt like his work with the feminine side was not complete, but it was a good opportunity to do some work with the masculine, and so I said, if you're going to continue with this medicine, it's probably more appropriate to have San Pedro. And it's very difficult for him to come across these things there. So he said as soon as our call was over, he got into contact with somebody from his OTO lodge, and they said, oh, by the way, did you need some cactus powder? I mean, we had just finished our call. So what's going on, Devin, this kind of stuff happens all the time. It becomes the rule even more than the exception, and there are different varieties of it. I would say that with absolute certainty, I've experienced telepathy at least a dozen times where it was absolutely undeniably telepathy. In a couple of cases, at least two cases where the information that was received was verbatim. Every single word was exactly the same. And in one of those cases, it was as if the person was looking through my eyes. She knew everything that I had been doing and literally every word of every thought that had gone through my head. And then precognitions, I have definitely experienced that a number of times. And the most common one, I think, is that I have access to information that I shouldn't know, that I have no way of knowing. One of those instances I became aware of just, I think, 2 or 3 days ago. Years ago, someone asked me what a monad was, and I went into this really in-depth explanation, and I remember thinking, I'm not really sure if I should have done that because I've actually never studied this, but I knew that I knew what I was talking about. And a couple of days ago, I happened to research Leibniz, the mathematician, and his work on the binary number system because I'm doing a video that you guys all need to watch when it comes. By the way, you guys, don't forget to hit the like button, share, subscribe, support us on Patreon, where you can join our secret streams. And I'm going to start doing commentary to every video that I release. So there'll be expanded versions of every single video, and then also, in some cases, I'm going to do pretty cursory videos for the public, and then I'll go into a lot of depth in the Patreon. The next one that's coming out tomorrow is very rare psychedelic compounds. A bunch of information about that, and a lot of them I can almost guarantee you've never heard of. So where was I at? Whoa, accessing information that I couldn't possibly have. Just on a very basic level, the monad thing, Leibniz and the monad, that's what reminded me of the video, Robert Anton Wilson, and synchronicity. The video is called Synchronicity, Isomorphism, and the Implicate Order. And in part, it offers a scientific and rational explanation for these type of experiences, or at least certain varieties of these kinds of experiences. But Leibniz came up in the course of creating this video, and I discovered that he was the person who originally conceptualized the monad, at least in his terms, and it was exactly as I had described it out of nowhere, just because I needed the term. A little while back, also maybe a year or two ago, I was looking for a word to describe bringing spiritual insight down and grounding it out in the physical world in something usable, and the word that I chose was investiture, and I had never heard that word before, to my knowledge. I definitely had not studied finance at that point in my life. It's probably 3 or 4 years ago, actually, because I did end up studying finance in the last couple of years. But yeah, so it was, 3 or 4 years ago. And it turned out that, when I looked it up to make sure that I was using it correctly, it's a financial term, but it had been co-opted by the spiritual community and used exactly in the way that I was using it. And that kind of experience happens a lot, where it's like I need information or I need a word or something, and I just have it. There have been much stranger instances of that and more dramatic, but I'm just trying to give like a cursory overview of the type of things that I am certain happen in terms of having access to capacities of consciousness that are preternatural, or maybe a little bit beyond the norm. And then precognitive experiences that I've had range from, international circumstances. Some of them are maybe unfulfilled. For example, I had a vision many years ago where I was told by these alien entities, I had eaten way too many mushrooms, and these alien entities were telling me, we know you're concerned about the Patriot Act and the New World Order and all this stuff that's happening on your planet, but don't worry, at the last minute, right when the New World Order is about to take over the planet, and the oceans are almost dead because they're so full of poison and plastic and all, at the very last hour, we'll intervene. And now here we are on the brink of World War III. It's exactly as they described in this vision. So that was a little less certain, but it certainly seems consistent with what we're actually experiencing. And then there's some pretty remarkable circumstances that I've actually captured for posterity on my YouTube channel, which shocked me as much as anyone else. In fact, one of them is so unbelievable that a lot of people have accused me of engineering it, because it's just not reasonable. And I don't blame them one little bit. But I made a video called The Phoenix Process that is about the process, I guess, of opening the third eye and, sorting out your shadow stuff and all of that, the awakening process. And during the course of that video, I mentioned the number 1111, and that even thinking about it or getting yourself into that space could actually provoke the sort of synchronicities that you associate with 1111. And so after I finished the video, which was videoed in 4 different areas over 3 or 4 weeks, and then jumbled together, out of sequence too. When I was looking for where I mentioned this about 1111, I ended up clicking on 1111 because I couldn't find it, and I thought, no way. Clicked on 1111, and you hear 1111 come out of my mouth. It's exactly perfect. And I'm literally saying that just mentioning this can provoke it to happen. It's a 36-minute long video. The chances of that are just astronomically low. And I was speaking so specifically about that particular phenomena in exactly the way that it manifested. It's definitely absolutely mind-boggling. And then about 12 minutes later in that video, I talk about freezing an image in your mind during a certain type of meditation. And when I say that, my image freezes. I just don't know how to dismiss that as coincidence. I really don't. Now, here's really the meat and potatoes of this thing, though, because obviously when people are taken to task about this, when they're called out, when they're challenged to do it publicly, I didn't talk about channeling yet, though, did I? This is another one that I think is almost always fake. Before I get into my explanation, I want to touch on each one of these subjects. It's almost always fake, and I don't necessarily believe that you can talk to dead people. I don't really, when people believe they have a spiritual attachment and they have some being following them around throughout their life, or, whatever kind of thing it is, it's just generally not convincing. And I really hope that people that have passed on have something other than just sitting around waiting to talk to dead relatives to do. It just doesn't seem realistic at all to me. But at the same time, I took initiation in the Hermetic Order of Golden Dawn, maybe, 13 years ago or something like that. And when I was a neophyte in the very early stages of it, I was given a task to stop by this old friend of mine. His name was Joe. He was a ex-bandito, so like a gangbanger in Mexico. And I'm not going to go through every detail of the story, but it was very strange. And I eventually ended up in his living room, and I knew that his brother had been shot and killed. And I knew that it was my job to convince him to forgive the guy that killed his brother. And so I took a small puff of marijuana just to kind of like relax and open my mind up, and everything turned purple, which I now understand is typical of this kind of experience. There was like a purple hue. I had my eyes closed, but still this purple hue. And I said, "Who's Christina?" And his eyes bugged out of his head, and he says, that's the bitch that got my brother killed. And then I knew the name of the dog, and I knew, all of these other characters that were involved. And eventually I did convince him to forgive the guy that had killed his brother. And it was eating this guy alive. It was absolutely necessary. And it turned out I didn't know this until this experience, but he had been killed too. The guy that killed the guy's brother was already dead, so there's no revenge to be had. So it's just like this insanely maddening thing that he had all this hatred and nowhere to vent it. You know what I mean? He couldn't even go kill the guy. And so here's the thing, though, and this is now we're going to get into the critical thinking phase of this discussion, because it's really, really important. I've watched a lot of my friends go down in flames, I feel like, because as soon as they open their mind, they become too open-minded, too willing to accept things, too willing to believe things. They end up paying fraudulent psychics. Basically, honestly, lose my respect, because I can't really I don't mean in like a really negative or nasty way, but I just mean like I no longer have common ground to really communicate, or once you go down the new age rabbit hole, I'm just kind of done with you. It's just really sad to me. And, it's just one of those things that just rubs me the wrong way. that kind of gullibility and naivety and just abandoning reason. And, that's not what we need. We need people that are capable of navigating the full spectrum of consciousness without becoming flakes and muddle-headed mystics. You don't want to become so open-minded that wind is whistling through your ears. One of the biggest problems with acquiring a greater mass of people that have experienced genuine gnosis is that so many people make us look like insane idiots. And that's, something that I am really invested in trying to mitigate, is the damage from that. And, that's why it's so important to go through all the different possibilities, right? When I was apparently channeling, this guy's dead relatives, I was in the room with him. A feedback loop between our subconscious minds is a totally valid explanation. There's actually no reason to believe that I was actually communicating with his dead relatives just because the information I received was accurate. Short-range telepathy, I think, I don't know how anyone could even say that it doesn't happen. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. If your brain can decipher its own waves, it absolutely can decipher other people's waves, I would think, So we have magnetite in our brain, right? And that's what picks up these signals. That's what it's there for. If other people are having thoughts and we have magnetite in our brains, I guarantee you that magnetite is picking up the electromagnetic waves that are emanating and have the information from the other person's brain. It's a no-brainer, right? I mean, there's just no doubt about it. And the reason that we're not normally hearing this stuff is because it's an evolutionary adaptation to filter it out. If we were constantly bombarded by the full spectrum of light and all of the sensory input in the universe and other people's thoughts and the thoughts of animals and all, what I mean? All of the possible sensory input that we could receive has to be narrowed down to a very narrow bandwidth of relevancy, only that which is absolutely relevant. Because we would become overwhelmed, we wouldn't be able to function. And this is, again, one of the great utilities of psychedelics. You can do this with meditation to an extent, I think. But that's another argument that I don't really find has a lot of merit, that meditation is somehow better than psychedelics. It's just another tool. It does different things, you know what I mean? But I don't think it gives you access to, and generally it doesn't give you access to these capacities of consciousness and the network of the universal mind, the light lattice of consciousness, quite the way that adept use of psychedelics does. But yeah, okay, so we have the feedback loop possibility. So, not necessary to invoke that I'm channeling dead people. Although I did that to my mother once when I was not in the same room with her. So now we have another level of weirdness. I was on the phone with her, and this was again during the Phoenix process part of my life. And I was named after a guy, my middle names, that was her best friend when she was a teenager, and he died somehow. And she had lied to me, which was something my mom did often, and told me that he had crashed his motorcycle. And so my name was Harley, and my middle name was Michael James, because he had died on a Harley and his name was James Michael, right? Not true. Turned out that he had huffed himself to death on paint and alcohol. And later, how they say you always marry your mother? I married a girl whose fiance died because he huffed paint while drunk. The same way that my mom's true love died. Another level of just absolute insanity, And I think that kind of thing, by the way, really challenges the idea that you're picking up on subconscious cues, and that's why people gravitate towards, their mother or their father. I think it's obviously something much weirder than that, because that is just, too much. But anyway, she lied about that. And I knew it one day, and I called her up, and I was like, what really happened to Michael James? And she's like, what? I was like, he didn't fucking die in a motorcycle crash. What really happened to him? And that's when she told me the truth. And the way that happened, actually, there was a voice in my head that said, call your mother. And I called her. Oh, you know what? It's actually even weirder than that. The voice said, what's that rock star's name? There's a rock star that has the same name. He had that Book of Dreams album, Steve or something. Oh, man. Jerry Garcia hated him. He was from San Francisco. I can't remember the guy's name. Steve, Book of Dreams, fly like an eagle to the sea. That guy. He had the same name as that guy. And she said, ask your mom about that guy's name, whatever his name was. Steve Winwood, we'll call him. It's not right, but ask her about Steve Winwood. So I asked her thinking, what was she listening to this? And she goes, silence, just dead silence. And she goes, you're scaring me. And I was like, why? And she said, because that's the guy that he killed himself over. He apparently huffed himself to death on purpose, or because he was just so depressed that this girl had cheated on him with this guy. I knew his name, and that voice told me, I knew what it was about. Call your mom, ask her about this name, and ask her what really happened to Michael James. And it was all totally true. So, I don't know what in the hell that could possibly be except for this. Geneticists have proven that we have access to the memories of our ancestors. So it still doesn't prove that there was some spirit in my ear whispering stuff. My subconscious mind tapped into my genes. That's all it would have taken because it was my mom. And so you see what happens here. You will never, ever, ever know for certain about this stuff. You will not. Another possibility that involves quantum mechanics and has, again, nothing to do with actually channeling dead people. Steve Miller. That is Steve Miller. Yep, that was the guy's name. Another possibility that has absolutely nothing to do with channeling dead people is that it's arising at the quantum level somehow. Because quantum mechanic tells us that information is never lost, that all information is preserved at the quantum level. So everything that ever happened is always happening, is how I interpret that bit of information, right? And it's interesting because thermodynamics tells us the opposite, entropy and loss of information. And so we know that we have layers and levels of truth, right? At this level, the level of thermodynamics, which isn't quite as, fine of a level as quantum mechanics, we do have information loss. So it's difficult to ascertain if it's relevant that information being retained at the quantum level, would it be lost at the next level? Could we actually access it that way? I think it's very likely that we can. And the reason that I think it's so likely that we can is that I had a vision many, many years ago that basically described this photon busting through the space-time fabric, I guess, almost like a spermatozoa of light. And that single starseed is how I thought of it. Obviously, this has nothing to do with the popular conception of starseed, but I thought of it as a starseed because eventually it would become a star. And then if the star was successful, it would become a black hole. And what actually is on the other side of black holes is another universe. But basically, the process was that nothing became conscious. That consciousness was chicken or the egg. I don't know whether it's consciousness first or light first, but I think it's light first. Although, I don't know. But the idea basically was that nothing became conscious, and that consciousness is light. And what happens in the universe is that the matter basically replicates by means of reflection. And it builds, based on these patterns like the Fibonacci sequence, possibilities. And once all of those possibilities have been fulfilled without, the limitations are imposed by the laws of the universe. Once those have all been fulfilled, the universe collapses back in on itself and the singularity happens again and the universe starts over. And so we basically live the same life over and over again with tiny variations. And that is now called quantum loop theory. But I had this vision well before the theory, 15 years before the theory existed. And there was a lot of detail. There was an awful lot of detail, even down to that starseed. And the introduction of the idea of quantum bounce. The idea that a awareness reflected itself is now a developing theory. And this isn't just my idea. This is mystics from all over history that have said this. The idea that some consciousness suddenly became aware, and that was the origin point of the universe. The real catalyst of the singularity was awareness itself, of course, arising from the light. But the big bounce now, they're saying before the Big Bang, there was a big bounce. And the way the physicists describe it was that it was as if a pre-existing state had reflected itself and almost like spooked it, and it bounced and blew up or something. But, there's this whole idea of, mysticism preceding scientific revelation is really, really gaining a lot of steam lately. I don't know if you guys saw the post that I made in, my bad. It's going to post at 6:00 tomorrow. But so spoiler alert. They just took a picture of a photon at the exact moment that it becomes entangled with another photon. So it's called the biphoton phase. And so the photons are out of phase, and one of them represents a negative polarity and the other one represents a positive polarity. And it's exactly a yin-yang symbol, exactly, down to the colors on each side being inside of, the little circle of white inside the black and the little black inside the white, the whole thing. And it's real. It's University of Ottawa. Exactly. And so, and I hope I'm being clear, you guys, that I'm not trying to discount all these other possibilities. I'm not saying that it's impossible that we can contact dead people. I really doubt it. I don't see any reason for that to exist. I think even if we have an afterlife or we're reincarnated, you would move on with your life. I think that in cases where it's accurate like that, like what I did to my mom that time, it's much more likely that it's information that is stored in a field. And I don't doubt for a second that field of information could acquire a personality and memories. It really does seem like information is retained, and it also seems, I've been saying consciousness is a field since I was like 15 years old, it just seemed obvious to me. And, now we have the work of Michael Levin proving that some sort of electromagnetic impulse is shaping the evolution of organisms more than DNA is. That's, a really remarkable thing. And so what I'm suggesting basically is that, these experiences are more than likely basically due to malfunctions in the interface. That the filter that normally would reduce the reducing valve that reduces our perception down to something manageable backfires at time. It short circuits a little bit and things leak in. It is interesting to me, though, that my own experience has suggested a mediator a lot of the time. It's as if information that I receive in that way can be withheld until exactly the right moment. And I get information that I need and not generally information that I want. If it's both, then I usually will have access to it. So that's the general idea about that. And then, precognition. A lot of people have those kind of experiences, and I think that it's very common to make a huge mistake And this, Aleister Crowley wrote 150 years ago that the most common mistake that a magician makes is to think that his magic can do more for him than it can. That absolutely is the most common mistake, I think. And, people experience these things once or twice, and then they believe that every thought that they want to believe is of that nature. They believe. And that's one of the main reasons why this stuff is so dangerous. Because you can very easily become delusional, and you can very easily go insane by, not developing the proper skill set to manage an expanded consciousness. People don't think a lot about that. People just think, oh, I'm going to expand my consciousness. It's going to be fun, whatever. But the reality is that we have not been raised in a culture that has awareness of these modalities. And so it's kind of like giving someone a Lamborghini that doesn't even know how to drive a car. All of a sudden you have the ability to go 220 miles an hour and wreck into a wall, and you're not prepared to maneuver the vehicle at all, and you think you are. So, it can be very, very dangerous. But what I'm saying about precognition is that I also don't see any reason to invoke woo. Someone asked Maynard James Keenan from Tool how it is that he wrote the song Fear Inoculum many years before COVID, but the album happened to be released right before COVID hit, like 6 months or something. And it's literally about a pandemic causing fear and separation of people, causing people to fear and hate each other. It sounds like it was written as a response to COVID. And he said, people want to make a profit of me, but it's actually just subconscious pattern recognition. There's no woo about it. It's just subconscious pattern recognition. And that's what I've always thought too, that, the mind is constantly mapping experience. There are higher orders of symmetry that exist in the universe. Pythagoras talked about this thousands of years ago. The idea of isomorphic resonance, that there are waves of different orders of both magnitude and amplitude. So there are gigantic waves that are oscillating that compel chaos to order on a grand level, so across centuries and galaxies and universes. And then there are waves that are doing it at the subatomic level, and they're acting as photons, giving rise to our consciousness. And this is where we get experiences of symmetry, right? When you establish communication between the two hemispheres of the brain, you have established a greater level of symmetry in your experience. And so your inner experience synchronizes with your external experience. And that manifests as synchronicity, but it's actually the function of an isomorphic wave. And isomorph, by the way, means the same but different. So the synchronicity is internal and external, and therefore it's the same but different, really, really interesting stuff, in my opinion. Yeah, I mean, it is frustrating for me for sure, Mr. Something Else. The numbers that I have, I mean, I know the content is pretty powerful and unique, and after 5 years, I'm getting 8 people. I used to get, up to 14,000. Sometimes I don't know why I'm even doing this anymore. They've really got me buried. It's really just absolutely pathetic. And so obvious, a lot of people try to tell me, oh, you're not shadow banned, and it's like, come on. People have similar content that's not as good, and they're getting 1,400 views an hour. Obviously, it's not me. I'm aware of that. So, yeah, that's not super inspiring. But here's the thing, even if these mechanistic explanations for these phenomena and these experiences are correct, I don't really understand why that rubs so many people wrong. I think that there's a lot of desire to move into a fantasy-based type of spirituality because the world, going on, Northern Lights? The world is getting so harsh and so frightening and uncertain. I've watched a lot of my friends do this. Their lives are not as they would like them to be exactly. And so their spiritual life becomes this like comic book fantasy that has no, metric of, there's no critical thinking. There's no skepticism. There's nothing but, selective perception engaged in order to craft, some kind of fantastical conception of the universe. And the reality is that impossible things don't happen on this plane of existence. Everything that happens here has some kind of mechanism of action. So if psychic phenomena, if it happens, there's going to be some kind of explanation in terms of, the deterministic process that is involved. And it's going to have to do with the electromagnetic field and light, And actually, the answer kind of just hit me right now. Long-range telepathy used to bother the hell out of me because short-range telepathy, I can totally understand how that happens. We all have magnetite in our heads. We all have brain waves carrying our thoughts. No problem. This is easy to understand. And I've had some remarkable experiences of telepathy. One of the most interesting, and this one really cemented that the pineal gland is central to all of this in my mind because I had an experience where I could see out of it on ayahuasca one night. And the first thing that happened is a mosquito landed on my forehead and I could see it coming. And then I felt it actually bite me. And so I realized it was real. And I was like, wait, my eyes are closed. And so I stood up and walked around and I could see my hand waving in front of my face, all this stuff, tracking everything perfectly. And the next night I went downstairs and this shaman I had telepathic experiences with all the time. Which is to be expected, right? The ayahuasca compounds were originally called telepamine. And, on one occasion I just met my partner. We now have a child together. And I was sitting with my eyes closed thinking what I should do about her. And I was thinking I should invite her to tea because it's, more casual than dinner. And I opened my eyes and looked beside me and there's the shaman and he goes, "The German girl, invite her to tea, but by the river." And, at that point I was used to it. So it's not like I was really that shocked or anything. But anyways, the night after the experience of seeing through my third eye, I went downstairs and the shaman says to me, sometimes you can see through your forehead when you drink the medicine. Not hello, how'd you sleep, good morning, nothing at all. Straight to sometimes you can see through your forehead when you drink the medicine. So I went home and I Googled, are there optic nerves and lenses in the third eye? And sure enough, it's connected to the visual neocortex and it's wired in and everything. So you absolutely can see through it. In fact, some people think that eidetic visuals, which means when your eyes closed, you still see stuff, that it's your pineal gland. It's your third eye that's responsible for that. By the way, you guys, hit the like button, share, subscribe, support us on Patreon. You can also send support to the addresses in the chat. We're demonetized and shadow banned. So I put dozens and dozens and dozens of hours into YouTube and I get little in return. In fact, I have put in about 40 hours so far in the next video that I'm going to publish. Not this one on Saturday, but the one that's coming next Saturday, and it's only halfway done. And our Patreon is going to have a lot more perks starting now. So there'll be expanded versions of all my videos there. But yeah, so pineal gland wired in, definitely can see through it, definitely works as described. But we were going somewhere before I went on my rant about the pineal gland there. It was probably about the fact that, these altered states do increase the frequency and the intensity of these kind of psychic experiences. I've definitely had numerous experiences with DMT entities where I was told things that were specific, names were given, amounts of money were given that were absolutely true. In one occasion, a mantis opened up the vision as it was closing and like stuck his head back into this dimension. And he's like, hey, so-and-so just sent you $1,000, and it closed and it was gone. My phone beeped. I picked it up. And it was the person named, and they had just sent me $1,000 that I had not asked for. I had not sent out any distress signals, absolutely nothing. Oh, that's where I was going. The answer to all of this and the long-range telepathy. Sorry about that, guys. I had a little bit of a brain fart there, but consciousness has its origin in the photon, right? I'm not 100% sure if it happens when the photon interacts with the electromagnetic field, because that's what light is. The photons don't glow. They're not lightning bugs. They're not fireflies. The light is produced when they pass through the field at light speed. So it is something akin to atomic fire. So I guess in a way it doesn't matter. I'm just curious, what is actually exactly going on there. But our consciousness arises from light, and light moves at light speed. So anywhere on Earth at light speed is like no time at all. And the photons that make up our consciousness are constantly interfacing with the electromagnetic field that encircles the Earth. That's how it happens. That's it. That's it. That's the mechanistic basis for telepathy. If anybody asks you, you're dealing with some skeptic, it's like, oh, well, this is fucking stupid. People just don't understand that science it's not science. Science is the observation, but the universe has, mechanistic basis for things that science just doesn't understand yet. It doesn't mean that it's woo necessarily. Some things are easy to recognize as woo and say, this is just not real. That's very easy to do, and I think the idea that spiritual beliefs are just kind of shit people make up, and then just believe because they want to, and everyone has different ideas and they're all true and all that crap is polite sounding, but it's not real. Certain things are real, other things are not. There's one truth about any question, and that's it. Your truth is not true for you. It's just your opinion, and that's different from truth, and I actually think that we should change our attitude about that, and I'm not talking about not having tolerance, but, we have an obligation to have credibility and to be authentic and, to have high standards of conduct and credulity. It's really, really important. And, I think people are intimidated by the idea of becoming spiritual, and also the hierarchy idea, that we put prophets and shamans and psychics and people that we think know more than us about spiritual things up on a pedestal. I think that actually intimidates a lot of people into being ineffective or less effective than they could be, because they feel like it is a lofty position that is reserved for the elect. And in some ways, that is actually true in my experience. Some of us do seem to have started a dialogue with the universal mind as children, and it does take decades of experience to develop the skill set to navigate this stuff without becoming overwhelmed, without losing your path, without losing your focus. It is actually very difficult. And I have to admit, maybe it's ego, but I have friends that will, drink ayahuasca a few times, and then they think that, they're on the same level as any of the great occultists or whatever. And it's obviously insane. And it does bug me to, see so many people that think that all they have to do is believe in stuff for no reason, and that elevates them. This stuff really does have the capacity to catalyze ego inflation, because people can make claims to just suddenly have access to paranormal powers and, abilities, and they haven't earned it. They haven't earned it, and it's not really how it works, you know? So it's an interesting balancing act, you know, because on the one hand, I think we need to stop putting people on pedestals, but on the other hand, we need to have the respect and humility to realize that when it comes to routinely accessing the Akashic record and having precognitions and all that stuff, if you haven't been working on this for most of your life, it's probably not you, you know, and it doesn't mean it can't be. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah, we don't have the proper respect for the office of the mystic or the shaman, and yet we still manage to idolize them. It's very confusing trying to understand humanity for me, because it seems like in general the masses tend to get everything exactly wrong without fail, or with fail. Failing without fail? Can I even say that? You know, it is true that a person must have willpower and discipline. You must have the ability to be objective. You can't be intellectually lazy. You know, nothing comes easy. And the pursuit of higher knowledge is just as tedious and just as involved and just as difficult as physics. You know, Aleister Crowley said that magic is actually the most difficult branch of physics and the most dangerous. And I don't really think that's an exaggeration, you know? But then at the same time, if you are willing to actually do the meditation, to do the pranayama, to take the psychedelics, to study the sciences, and to do everything that's really necessary to become an adept metaphysical entity, that opportunity is available to you. But you're not going to just drink ayahuasca twice and, you know, just suddenly become able to access the entirety of the Akashic record. And I honestly, I mean, I've just watched someone become that guy. So tread carefully, folks. Lots of deep breaths. By the way, I do consultations. I can act as a guide for you if it's appropriate, and you can contact me through email. We also still have a couple of spaces available for a retreat in October. You can come for any part of it. You don't have to come for the whole month. But I want to make it clear, when I say I do consultations, I do not do readings. And that's another thing that I think is a total scam. Past life regressions are scams. If you cannot get that information on your own, you should not have it. And anyone that charges money for that type of thing is ethically in the wrong. Period. End of story. It's not real. And if anyone is charging you for it, they're not good. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I can't remember why I brought that up, though. It's getting late. It's way past my bedtime. You have to develop the ability to access that information on your own. And if you do embark on that kind of path, you will have to live with the fact that you'll never know if past incarnation memories are really from a past life or not, because there is a field of consciousness that stores memories. You have genetic memories. So if it's a person that you may have been, related to through ancestry, you can have memories. There's the possibility of an Akashic record. So you can never be certain about anything, and you just have to live with it. If you want to be a good, metaphysician, if you want to have a legitimate spiritual life with substance, you're never going to know anything. That kind of belief is just the death of intelligence. It's just not advisable. And then people that do readings over the internet too, I think that's entirely a scam. I do believe that intuitive healing is, I know all kinds of things about, I meet people, I read the entire contents of their being in a second. People have told me that it makes it very difficult to be around me, because usually you have this social lubrication and you have the ability to kind of hide behind your politesse. And with me, you can't do that. And I don't pretend like I'm not seeing through everything. Not for a second. So it's a blessing and a curse, but I really don't think that doing that sort of thing over the internet is really appropriate. It is possible maybe that face-to-face in a video call. But yeah, there's a lot of, the overwhelming majority of people are scammers. And I think that a lot of those scammers are well-meaning scammers. They probably have had a few legitimate experiences, and then they believe that everything that they do is real, when almost none of it is. These experiences, in case I haven't made this point clear enough, are intermittent, right? I have had a lot of them, far more than I think is normal for people, based on the feedback that I've gotten, but it's not consistent, and anyone that's ever been challenged to prove their psychic abilities on the spot has failed every single time ever. So, that's just how it is. It's intermittent. And sometimes I think it's intermittent because we don't get to decide when it happens and when it doesn't. So I hope this stream has been helpful to you guys. I appreciate each and every one of you. Please do hit the like button, share, subscribe, support us on Patreon. Join me tomorrow. I made a video I'm really proud of about the rarest psychedelics in the world. Mushrooms that produce ketamine naturally, and fish that will get you in a delirious state for 36 hours. And the downside of the video is that almost none of this shit should be tried by anyone ever. But it is interesting nonetheless. And then I'll do a stream about plant medicine after the fact. So I hope to see at least some of you guys here in October. We still have, I think, 2 spaces open. We'd really like to fill them, because if we can, then the family gets to move to Ayampe, to the coast. That's basically the reason for these retreats, so that we can move out to Ayampe. There's a school there that we really want to get our son into, but it's $300 a month, and the coast is way more expensive. So we need to go there with a little bit of a nest egg. So yeah, join the Patreon too, because all the extended videos are going to be interesting. I'm actually making my videos for the public shorter now. They're just going to be like a precursor or a cursory glance at a subject. And if you want the meat and potatoes of it, you're going to have to join Patreon, because I'm demonetized, shadow banned. I put 50 hours into a video and I make $2. I can't keep doing that. So if you guys want to see me to continue to make meaningful content, you're going to have to join the Patreon, because I'm just not going to do it for the public anymore. So thank you so much, you guys, for this. Well, you know what? I didn't talk about the methods for this very much, but we'll do another video where I'll get into that more. So thank you guys so much for spending this time with me, and I'll see you again soon.